Hi everyone, this video is going to go over the actual rhetorical analysis assignment. So I have a folder here with a lot of handouts, and I sort of put a lot together here that you can use if you need some extra information about rhetorical analysis writing. For the videos that I'll give you, I'll go over the actual assignment, and then I'll have a separate video where I go over the strategies for writing a rhetorical analysis essay. So in this one, I'm going to just concentrate on the actual assignment, what you're required and expected to do for the rhetorical analysis essay. So I'm going to open that one up, and we're just going to go through it. So let me see if I can get it just a little bit bigger on the page for you. So a little bit too big. There we go. Okay, so the scope of the assignment, basically you're going to be analyzing using the rhetorical strategy elements and strategies. Basically you're going to be looking at the appeals that the writer made to the reader to persuade the reader to believe or understand the writer's perspective or point of view on the topic. So whenever you have rhetoric, which we'll talk a little bit about in the other video more precisely, but whenever you have a rhetorical analysis, you're basically looking at logos, pathos, and ethos. So that's going to be the basis for your analysis. You can also bring in analysis of tone, intended audience, style, things that the author may use to persuade the audience or to get the reader's attention. So this is a precise style of writing, and it's something that you sort of have a formula to follow in a way. It's not, I'm getting a little smaller for you, it's not a typical essay where you just sort of have freedom to go in a lot of different directions. You do have some freedoms of how to arrange the information depending on what article you're analyzing, but you still have to follow a certain protocol for fulfilling the requirements of this type of writing. So let's just go over the basic guidelines for what you need to include in the essay. So it needs to be 2 to 3 pages, and this does not include the title page, which the title page is required, and you will lose points if, and I believe it's 10 points if you don't have a title page. And it does not include the references page. So since you have research, you're going to have a references page that's always separate from the actual essay, and that does not go into the page count. Obviously, it needs to be typed. It needs to be saved as a Microsoft Word docx or PDF document. And you need to double space everything, but please do not add extra spaces. If you add extra spaces, you're not following the proper guidelines for APA formatting. And this is true also for MLA formatting. You want 12-point font Times New Roman. Now, I do understand that with APA and the new edition that they released last spring, or in the spring of 2020, I think, or it may have been the fall of 2019. With the 7th edition, you are allowed different fonts, but I'm telling you that for the requirements for my class, I require Times New Roman. Now, if you get into another class and they have, they're using APA, they may allow for different fonts that are available within the rules of APA 7th edition, but I require Times New Roman. I like to stick with the basic font that has been used for years. You do want to follow all APA formatting. That would include things like double spacing, 12-point font, making sure you have a title on the title page and the first page of the actual essay, making sure that your sheet with all of your sources on it has the title of references rather than anything else. APA does have a references sheet rather than a works cited or a sources or a bibliography. Also make sure that all of your citations have hanging indents, and make sure all your citations are in APA formatting. And there is the expectation that if you do use a citation machine, that you double check the citations in the Little Seagull Handbook or through Purdue OWL. So for this assignment, you're going to choose a persuasive scholarly article. Scholarly meaning it came from a database that JCC has a subscription to. We've talked about this previously with your previous research. And if I were you, I would start with the annotated bibliography and kind of see what you have available there. You do want your article to have some persuasive qualities. You want to avoid choosing an article that is just sort of a factual, kind of facts only, information only type of article. So make sure it has persuasive qualities and that it has a point of view. And one of the purposes of the article would be to persuade or convince the reader of certain elements from that side of the argument. If you don't find a suitable article in your annotated bibliography, you're more than welcome, and this is true for the rest of the semester, to do additional research. This is sort of a fluid process, and I understand that sometimes you may be writing something and realize that you need another source, and that's fine if you go back to the databases to choose something. Please do not ask me if you can use a Google article. I don't want you using a Google article. I want you to use a JCC scholarly article from the databases that are available there, and there are many. You have Gale, NC Live, Opposing Viewpoints. I mean, it's just, the list goes on and on. So don't just look at NC Live. If you don't find something there, go to another service and look through their database to see if you can find something. Also remember that Nathan Stansel is our liaison with the library, and you're welcome to call him during regular business hours for the library. We also have the chat feature with the library, and you are always welcome to utilize the chat feature with the library website, and that's open pretty much 24/7. I do believe they may shut down for a few hours on the weekend, and I think it may be Sunday. Those hours are more in the middle of the night, I think. Or late night, and that's just because I think they have to reboot the system. But there is a break, I believe, on Sunday on the weekends. But the majority of the time, even in the middle of the night, you can go to that chat feature and get help if you have any questions about formatting or anything with research. They have librarians that are staffed throughout the state of North Carolina to answer those chat questions. You can also use the Academic Skills Center for tutoring, and they do virtual tutoring, and so you would not have to go in person to get that help. I think you just have to call and make an appointment. And you can also use Smart Thinking. So once you get your draft developed, you could send the draft to Smart Thinking, and you can get some feedback on your essay. So once you find your article that you're going to use, and you've already done pre-writing, so you should have an article. I do allow for a little bit of change there. If you did pre-writing and you realize that the article didn't exactly fit, I'm okay if you change it. The reason you had the pre-writing assignment was so that you could develop the ideas in the pre-writing stage to then transition into the actual essay. But I do realize, as a writer and as a student, sometimes things don't go smoothly and you have to make some adjustments. So if you need to change the article from what you did in the pre-writing stage to something that's more adequate for this assignment, that's fine with me, because I think sometimes students will choose the wrong thing. They'll do the pre-writing assignment, realize it didn't really fit that well, and then they'll change. But the whole idea for the pre-writing was to sort of get started with writing the rhetorical analysis. So here's an overview of the parts that you'll include in the essay. And there's another handout that actually sort of blocks it out for you. And it's the handout that has the red, and it sort of has instructions for you on where to put what information. So with the introduction, you want to start with a larger conversation about the topic, because anytime you write, you want to make sure that you supply the proper amount of information so that your reader is familiar with the topic that you're writing about, or certain things that you'll reference. And so you want to start with a sort of a broad approach so that you can lead the reader to the more specific elements of what you'll be writing about. So start off with something that's sort of a everyman statement or an attention grabber. Do not start with a question. When you write, especially for academic or research writing, you want to try to avoid asking questions. That, in a way, it hurts your credibility a little bit if you're constantly asking questions to your reader. And if you have the habit of asking questions as you write, try to go through the draft and change all your questions into statements. It's not that difficult to turn a question into the statement, and it also directs the reader to your point that you're trying to make, rather than leaving an open-ended question and then the reader's not quite sure what you meant, or it may not translate properly as you think it might. So when you start a scholarly essay, try to start with a statement and try to make it a little broad and general, just so you get the attention of the reader and that you sort of draw them into the conversation in the introduction. You probably want to start off with an attention grabber and then transition with a few additional sentences, and then you want to end with the thesis statement. I'm okay with the rhetorical analysis if you have the thesis statement either at the end of the introduction or at the beginning of the summary about the article. It sort of works either way, and sometimes it just depends on your style of writing or how you've transitioned those ideas. So traditionally, a thesis statement in most essays will go towards the end of the introduction. But in a rhetorical analysis, because you're sort of having to set up the idea of the topic and then you're going to have a summary of the article, it sort of works either way, either at the beginning of the summary paragraph or at the end of the introduction. And I sort of leave that up to you. But the bottom line is, in your thesis statement, you need, and remember, a thesis statement is one sentence. I am all too often seeing 2 and 3 sentences. Students are representing that as a thesis statement. And while in upper level writing, you can have a couple of sentences for a thesis statement, you guys aren't there yet. And we're still trying to get you to show me that you understand what a thesis is and that you can write a concise one sentence thesis. Again, if you plan on going to graduate school, or if you plan on taking writing intensive classes all the way up until your senior year at a university, you will probably get to a level where you may have a 2-sentence thesis. But for now, I want just the one sentence, because at this point, we're really trying to hone in on our skills for writing, and you need to show that you can be that concise and that you can direct your writing in that way. But anyway, with your thesis statement for the rhetorical analysis, the way I like to teach it is, I do think that it works best if the thesis statement includes the author or authors, the title of the work, where it was published, and then the main idea or the controlling idea of the article. Does it work where that information comes just before the thesis? Yes, it can, but you can never reference the article until you have introduced it. So that is something that gets sort of lost in translation sometimes with writing or analyzing a work. And whenever you do that, you can never reference the article itself or the author or anything about the article until you have properly introduced it. So that's why I think the introduction works best with a broad statement, a couple of transitional sentences about the topic itself. Then you move into the thesis statement, where you tell the reader, this is who wrote it, this is where it was published, this was the title, and then here's the main idea of the article. Here's what the writer was trying to persuade the reader to understand. And again, that can come at the end of the introduction or the beginning of the summary paragraph. So once you get to the summary paragraph, again, your whole job as the writer is to get the reader comfortable with the information that will be analyzed. So you can't just start off, in the middle starting to analyze if you haven't properly introduced the topic, what the article is that is being analyzed, and some of the significant information from the article. So some things that you can look at in the summary, but you don't have to look at all of these things I've suggested, but some things you may want to bring into the summary would be, who is the author? Why is the author credible? Maybe why is the publication where it was published credible and significant? Does this author serve as a renowned researcher for this topic, or why is this publication important, or why is the article itself, what significance did it have in the information for this research? Who is the intended audience? I think a lot of you so far have had a lot of statements like, well, this is for anyone who reads can read this. Yes, that is stating the obvious. Anyone who can read words can read any article they choose to read. But what you want to do when you are analyzing is I want you to think about what audience did the author intend the information to be for. So, was it for radiologists? Was it for criminal justice majors? Was it for researchers of cancer? I mean, I don't know. That's something that you have to tell me as you analyze. And just to simply take the easy road and the cop out of saying it's for anyone who can read, be careful with stating the obvious when you write for academic intent, because it sort of makes you look a little lazy, or makes you look as if you really didn't understand the article yourself, and you want to build credibility with your reader in an academic environment. So make sure you show that you've thought through it fully, and that you understand why the article was written and who it was written for. You may look at if the author used appropriate tone. With most academic writing, they do use a very academic formal tone, but that's something you can look at. Like, was the information distributed properly for the topic? Occasionally you'll see some sarcasm or some play on words that maybe don't fit exactly, and you're welcome to discuss that in the analysis. Look at the style of writing, what the purpose for the writing was. And then you can also look at sort of the base of, why this article is significant, and you want to put those types of things in the summary. All right, once you do that, once you sort of set up the article, and that's what you do in the introduction and the summary, the first two paragraphs, then you're going to sort of have, you have the meat of this assignment. And that's where you have a section on ethos, a section on pathos, and a section on logos. Please do not try to intermix these things. Please do not make one big long paragraph on all three. You as the writer need to show organization, and you need to show that you can set this up so that it is systematic and that it makes sense. So I've put here ethos, pathos, logos. You do not have to use that order. So I always tell students, try to go with the one rhetorical strategy that was used best in the article, or was the most well stated, or had the most evidence in the article. Usually one will stand out as, it has more available in the article. So logic. So if you're looking at logos, logic may be what was featured more. If it's a very emotional type of topic, pathos may have been featured more. Pathos is often featured with case studies or anecdotal things, stories, narratives that tell stories about something happening to a human being. There's an article in the Norton Field Guide about organs for sale, and that has a lot of pathos in it because it's talking about people making the decision to donate a loved one's organs, and it brings in some emotional appeals in that article. So ethos is credibility, and that's when you look at the credibility of the information and the data and the evidence. Is it credible? When it was published, was it credible? Was the publication credible? Is it authoritative over the topic? Some people will also look at ethics with that, or authority over the information. So again, whatever order you use is fine with me. It just needs to make sense for the article that you are analyzing. So if you have one of the rhetorical strategies that is not featured in the article that you've chosen, and that does happen sometimes, you as the person analyzing, you still have to have a section on that rhetorical strategy. You are graded on all three. So let's say you have a very analytical kind of very scholarly and fact-based article, and there are not a lot of pathos that are evident in the article. You still have to have a paragraph on that, and you still have to show, why weren't appeals made? Were they needed? Would the article have been better if something was included to appeal to the reader's emotions? And we'll talk about this more in the video about rhetoric, but any good appeal to try to persuade really needs that full triangle of ethos, pathos, and logos. And that's one of the things you are being asked to analyze for this assignment is, was it a balanced appeal? Was it a balanced argument? How did they persuade? If you don't persuade with some sort of pathos, some sort of emotion or feeling, did you have a full appeal? And that's up to you to decide. You need to look to see, did you miss something? So I know in that thing that I referenced about organs for sale, that was very much centered on facts and evidence and data, and it didn't have as much pathos as you might think it maybe should have. I mean, I would have thought the whole article was about pathos, but that's something that someone who wrote about it might include in an analysis, that they might determine that there was too much pathos. They might determine that there was not enough. This is your analysis, and as long as you prove why it is the way you're saying it is, so you prove it with information from the article, quotes, anything that can come out of the article that you're analyzing, then you're right, as long as you prove it, and as long as it makes sense to what you're stating to be true. Pathos seems to be something that's tricky for a lot of argumentative articles, especially if the article is super scholarly with a lot of data and a lot of evidence that comes from research. But then again, you may have an article that centers on case studies and real people and narratives about the people that experience something, and then that has a lot of logos, but maybe it doesn't have as much logic. So, every article is going to be different, and you as the person analyzing and writing about it, you sort of have to determine, where everything falls. The best advice I can give you for preparing for this is to take notes as you read the article. These days we do a lot of electronic reading, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would take a pen and paper and maybe divide the paper in 3 parts and have a logo section, a pathos section, and an ethos section. And then every time you see something in that article, write it in that section of your blank piece of paper as you take notes, and beside of it, put the page number or put the reference so that you can find it again when you actually write the paper. If you have a printer at home and you want to print out the article, you could also do it with different colors of highlighters or different colors of pens where you're writing off to the side. Or you could just use, black pen and write off to the side logos, ethos, pathos if you have printed out the article. But you need some sort of record keeping, since you're looking for different parts of the article, to try to organize your analysis of these things. You'll probably think as you read the article, oh, I'll remember that. I'll have it ready for the essay. And then when you go to write the essay, you get sort of intimidated because you're staring at a blank screen trying to write the essay. So that is my best advice for this, is to somehow organize the parts of ethos, pathos, logos using the article before you ever write the essay itself. And that, that's the way I've found that it helps most students. Okay, after you analyze all of those things, logos, ethos, pathos, you're going to want to conclude. The best way to start a conclusion is to restate the thesis. Since I had suggested that your thesis should have the article and the author and the publication and the main idea, just rewrite that thesis. Just restate it. It's a great way to end the paper. You're sort of reminding the reader of what you just analyzed, and then you want to broaden it out somewhat. You want to possibly have some final thoughts about the analysis as you generalize the information, but do start off with that restated thesis statement so that you can reiterate what was analyzed, who wrote it, where it was published, all those kinds of things. So here's some tips and strategies for writing your rhetorical analysis. Include a topic sentence for each of the paragraphs. It's very important, and you're going to have headers in this assignment, but even though you have headers, you still must have a topic sentence that shows the reader what is being analyzed for that section. And if you have, let's say you start off with ethos and you have a good topic sentence for that, and then the next paragraph is pathos, then it's a good idea to transition from the previous idea to the idea that's coming in. So don't announce anything. Don't write it like as was stated in the previous paragraph. That's not a good way of writing. But you could state something like, while the author uses logos, in this way, she has additional appeals with pathos, and then you would maybe explain what those appeals were. So I think transitional writing is very effective because it sort of creates a very even an even kind of tapestry. I don't know if you know what tapestry is, but it's like a tapestry are those things that some people hang like in their bedrooms or something, and it's really colorful, and there are a lot of different colors that flow in and out of each other, and then it makes a beautiful picture. Well, when you write, it's good to create that kind of flow as well. One paragraph moves into the next, and then everything's kind of layered properly instead of stopping and starting abruptly. You do not have to define the rhetorical strategies, and please break the habit if you're one of these people who defines everything when you write. Whenever you write for an academic audience, you have to assume that they're educated and they're intelligent and they know the terms. Rhetorical strategies may be a little foreign to you because you may not have used them a lot in your regular life. But in an academic setting, rhetoric is a very common thing that people analyze and discuss, and the use of rhetoric is very common with academic writing, so please do not define. You can use context clues, so if you want to say that the author used logos as he reasoned or often or offered reasoning about, that's like a context clue, logos and reasoning. But please don't insult your audience by constantly defining common terms. You do want to include a lot of context clues as you go, just to signal the reader so that the reader knows how you're developing the ideas with your analysis. And as I said before, use transitional phrasing because it guides the reader and it helps them go from one place to the next. I sort of equate that to traffic signs. If you had to go drive someplace and you didn't exactly know where you were going, if you didn't have signs, you would be very lost. And the reader can be very lost as well if the writer does not supply some sort of traffic patterns for them so that they know what direction everything's going in. You do want to use quotes, but don't overuse quotes. So I would say for each of the rhetorical strategies, maybe use one quote from the article, and the rest should be paraphrasing or summarizing the information. You do want to use page numbers in your in-text citation. If you only have the one source, which would be the source that's being analyzed, you can just use the page numbers because we know that you only use the one source. If you do bring in extra research, like you've brought something in about the topic or some other discussion that you bring in the conversation, then you do have to use the different authors in the in-text citation so that it matches the references sheet. You want, this is one or two quotes. One's probably good. If you have two really good short quotes, that's good. Avoid the long quotes. A long quote is considered 4 lines or more, and you do not want that long of a quote. It muddies your writing, and probably no long quote is that worth it. You can always paraphrase or summarize part of it and just use the part that's the best. Don't drop in quotes. When you use a quote, you have to phrase into it or phrase out of it, and a quote can never stand alone in a paragraph. If you do that, you will lose major points with your writing because it shows that you're not writing your own words to integrate the quote into the paragraph. So we call those quote bombs. It just means you've just dropped them in and you've run away from them, and then you haven't added context to the quote. So you have to write words with the quote. So it could be something like, according to Dr. Smith at UNC hospitals, comma, he states, and then you would have the quote after that. Use the Siegel Handbook and use the Purdue OWL for help with integrating quotes, in-text citations, and citations. Do not use first or second person pronouns. There's a whole thing that we went over at the beginning of the semester about what first person and second person are. I did give you a reminder here. And use academic rigor. You don't want casual phrasing. You want it to be very formal and very academic. I did give you some links here to maybe help with writing the rhetorical analysis if you feel like you need extra help. And again, use the Academic Skills Center or Smart Thinking to help as well. And then on the last page, I did include a rhetorical triangle just to remind you the different things that you're being asked to include in the analysis. So logos is logic, reason, or proof. Pathos is emotions, values, feelings, something that's very personal to a human being. And then ethos is credibility, trust, authority, ethics. So that's how you kind of keep them straight. I always remember ethos, like authority. They both start with a noun. I don't know, that's how I remember it. Pathos, I always remember that from the word pathetic, like feelings, pathos. And then logos is pretty easy because logos is a word part of logic. So that's the assignment. Good luck, and I look forward to reading what you analyze. And make sure you watch the other video on just the overview of rhetoric.